So on Wednesday, I did Errol and the Bad Guy over on ESPN Plus, and a question was asked, and Errol went first on it, but I really liked his answer. A lot of times I don't. I think that's part of why we do this show together, to share opposing views. But I liked what Errol said here, and I want to share it with you guys. The question was, who was at fault in regards to the Max Holloway, Brian Ortega fallout? Who was at fault? Was Max at fault for having to pull out of the fight? Was the UFC at fault for trying to find a replacement for Brian Ortega, in this case in Jeremy Stephens? Was Brian Ortega at fault for refusing to take a short notice fight with Jeremy Stephens and saying, no, I want to wait and get the fight I was prepared for, which was Max? And here's what Errol's answer was. He said none of the above. He said nobody was at fault here. Matter of fact, I give Max's team credit. I co-signed that statement, but Errol said I give Max's team credit for stepping in. You know, it wasn't the UFC that pulled Max, and it wasn't the commission that pulled Max. It was his own team. Took a look at him, listened to him, and said, something's off. We're not moving forward with this. He said, I give them credit. They did the right thing. He said, I don't blame the UFC. I do not blame Dana White for trying to make the show move forward and find a replacement and come as close to delivering on the promised card as you can. In this case, keeping 50% of it together with Brian Ortega and finding somebody else to stand across from him. I don't blame him for that. That's what he's supposed to do. But I also don't blame Brian Ortega for saying, no, that's not what's best for me. I was promised Max. I was promised the real world championship, and that's what I'm going to hold out for. I liked that. I thought that was fair. But I want to offer a fourth element who also wasn't wrong, and that is the fan. The fan is not wrong to be perturbed by looking at this scenario and saying, Brian, you're an up-and-comer. You're an ass-whipper. You are claiming to us that you're the best fighter in the world, which is why you are here to fight for a world championship. You had a full camp, you're in town, you're licensed, and you're on weight. For us to expect that if the evidence that you have told us, which is you're the best in the world, is true, then you should be willing to fight anybody in the world, particularly if they are licensed in your weight class in Las Vegas and did not have a training camp. I think you need to include that fourth element. I don't know if Brian made the right decision or not, but I won't know. If it all works out and he gets back in there with Max, then he did. I can only tell you history, which is a number of guys who were promised fights. The fight fell through and they never re-got it. So for right now, we're in limbo with no answer to the question of was it the right move or was it the wrong move? And ultimately, we'll turn to Brian. We'll just go, hey, Brian, do you regret that decision or do you stand by it? And then he's the one that gets to choose. We'll see what he says, but I think he's going to need some time too. And I don't blame him. I agree with Errol. Nobody was wrong here. I do think moving forward, and then there was also a pay dispute with Ortega where he's saying, hey, I showed up. I did everything. Honor your side of this. But the contract is a little bit clearer. And you always hate to have to defer to a contract. You want to be able to just operate on what's right and wrong in relationships. I understand that side of it, but the contract is a little bit clear on what show means. And what show means is that you make it to the weigh-in. You get on that scale and get off that scale, and your fight is then canceled prior to competition. You have effectively shown. If you don't make it to the scale, you're on the come line. You're betting with the house. And things are still in limbo and jeopardy, and that's true, and that's a cold, hard reality at times. But that's true. Now, the UFC, I believe, has come out and said, hey, let's talk and let's figure something out with you. And I think that they will. I'm just sharing that element of it with you. But I think to solve this in the future, the dialogue just needs to be very clear. Hey, Brian Ortega, would you like to fight Max on July 7th? Great. Oh, and by the way, I'm going to do my absolute best to deliver you Max on July 7th. But I do want it expressly noted that this contract is to retain your services. Card is subject to change. We put that on the ticket and the posters. But I also need to put it in the forefront of your mind that I cannot control your opponent the same as I cannot control you. I can only do the best that I can. So we will lock in the date and we will lock in the weight class. After that, need you to be flexible. I think that would then solve this problem. I think then you would not have a dispute with anybody. You would not have people being able to argue that, hey, I did my part of this, but you didn't hold up yours. Everybody's got to move forward as partners in a business, doing the best that they can, but understanding that there are factors that are out of one's control. And I think maybe, and I don't know how to word that, and certainly I don't from a legal standpoint, but it could be figured out. I think that is an important part that does need to be understood. I am retaining your services at this weight class under the unified rules. Oh, and by the way, I hope and believe that this will be your opponent. To show to you that I hope and believe it, I'm going to tell this guy the same thing, and then I'm going to go spend millions of dollars letting the audience know about it. But if that does not buy your faith and my earnest in this negotiation, I don't know what will. So I am simply going to tell you that your opponent could change. So keep your eye on the roster, keep your eye on the ratings, and then let's move forward and do the best we can. That would solve the problem, what I just said. I don't know that it's terribly unrealistic, but I also don't know how much of that will ever happen. I just wish that it would. I wish that fighters would understand. I'll give you an example off the top of my head, but John Jones and Dan Henderson, UFC 151. That fight ended up getting scratched. That fight never got put back together. And I could give you, there's a lot of examples where guys were promised world championship opportunities. For some reason, the fight didn't happen. And they, in their mind, thought, oh, we'll just do it another time. A couple of guys have. But if you went back over history and counted up all of those world championship fights that were canceled, and then compared how many of them, numbers-wise, never got put back together versus how many of them did get put back together, the dids are coming up short. Demetrius Ray Borg comes to mind. That is a fight that was canceled and did get put back together. I don't know that I could offer you another one. There are other ones. For sure there are other ones, but I can't remember off the top of my head. I can remember a lot of fights that were scrapped, and we'll see what happens here.